Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. Alrighty, welcome to episode 2 of From Our Generation to Yours. I'm Crom Carmichael with my good friend Mike Hassel, and business associate. And we're going to pick up, Mike, where we left off last time, which was on the island. And we had just gotten to the period where you begin the division of labor. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the definitions that we're going to be using for this particular period on the island. And so we're going to be, and these definitions they're very, very precise, but I've made them precise to apply to this particular circumstance where you have 10 people who have a very, very low standard of living, and it's only 10 people. So we're going to define the division of labor as the coordination of activities that results in greater production for a given amount of effort. And that's the key part. That last part is for a given amount of effort. Then we're going to use the term productivity, the rate of production for a given amount of effort. Higher productivity implies more units produced for a given amount of effort.
So it's a ratio.
So it's a ratio, exactly. It's exactly. It says, I'm going to, in 2 hours, because I've divided the labor, I am going to produce more than I would have produced if I did it all by myself.
Great. The bigger the ratio is, the better.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
got it.
And also part of the division of labor is that people learn how to do things better if they're doing the same thing rather than if they're doing a whole bunch of different things. In business, we call it focus. And so, but in this island, we're going to say, I'm learning how to gather and haul water better and more of it than if I only was gathering water for me once a day. I would not be as good at gathering water as if I'm specializing in gathering water. And so, if you think about people who make things by hand, the more they make the things by hand, the faster they're generally able to do it. And so that's when we think about productivity. That's how we think about it. But it's what the result is. Now, non-productivity, on the other hand, is activity resulting in little or no value for the consumer. So just because somebody does a lot of work, if they end up not producing something of value, then that would be a non-productive activity.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's what it is. And so money, on our island, money is what accumulates when an individual has something of value more than he or she requires for immediate survival. And so on our island, by dividing the labor, if I'm going to become a water gatherer or if I'm going to become a food gatherer, I now am going to be using my excess food or my excess water as money to trade with the other people who've divided labor so that I can get the food, water, shelter, and clothing that I need to survive.
Well, this is a good example where the definition is a little bit different for this situation, because in a more complex society, money is a coin or a paper or something much more sophisticated. We're not yet so sophisticated, so we need to redefine the terms to be clear what we mean in this simplified example.
Exactly. And so that's why we go use the term money as I have more food than I need. I use it to barter.
Right.
And so that was kind of the way it worked before people had something that was a medium of exchange that was generally understood to have a particular value.
Yes.
Standard of living. The quality of life of an individual at any given time as measured by his opportunity to consume goods and services. Now, that definition, as we move into a more complex society, the implications of that definition will change based on the ability of people or societies to borrow money and the implications of that. But on our island, there is nothing that can be borrowed. And so let me say that one again. The quality of life of an individual at any given time as measured by his opportunity to consume goods and services. So that's how we're going to define standard of living on the island. And then it'll morph as we get into, please.
And so it doesn't necessarily mean what he does consume. It's what he has the opportunity to consume.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's a small distinction, but it matters on the island.
Okay.
And then the last is wealth. And this one is one that you and I have talked about.
I'm for it, by the way.
Pardon me?
I'm for it.
You're for wealth. We all
However
are.
you define it.
That's right. Yeah, well, here it is. The amount of capital an individual has. Now, in this island, they have money, meaning they have excess of something that they are using to barter. And then they will also have through the division of labor, they will actually have time available for things other than survival.
Right.
Because the division of labor, after the labor is divided and the activities for production are divided, these people are now paired off, and they do 5 different things. Each pair does 5 different things, and now the people are working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So they now have 4 hours extra a day per person. Now, you could call this a socialistic society, in the sense that everybody is exactly equal in terms of their production and in terms of their consumption. Right. But we're doing it that way to get to a point. And by the way, most villages and societies back hundreds of years ago, this was be pretty common as to how the distribution of wealth within a small community.
And this would be because they're self-contained. They don't travel very far. They don't have the technology to communicate very widely. And so what happens within a fairly small circle.
Right.
So we're mimicking that in this story.
Yes, we're hyper mimicking it, because we're putting them on.
For me.
Yeah, so we're putting them on the island, and we're saying there's 10 people, and here's how it works. And so now you have these people. And by the way, at this point in time, if somebody gets injured and cannot work for 10 days, the first question is, do we have the wherewithal to take care of that person while they are convalescing and getting better?
Right.
And the answer to that is yes, we do. But when they do get injured, we've lost their production, and they still need the goods to consume to survive. And so during that period of time, the other 9 people are going to work more than 12 hours a day, because there's now 9 instead of 10. But then they want to do that because they want that person's production. And as we discussed last time, they also, if they get hurt, they want the other people there to take care of them while they need it, which is why in a more modern world, why we buy insurance. Right. We buy car insurance, we buy homeowners insurance, these types of things. For that reason, we buy health insurance.
But it begins as reciprocity.
Yes.
The idea that you treat somebody like they treat you, maybe some of those rules come about before insurance.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And so it's a normal part. This is human nature.
Yeah.
That's really what we're talking about. So now, Mike, we're going to move from this what we call the period of the division of labor. We're now going to say, okay, these people now, by the way, they all live in the same area on the island, so it's almost like a camp. And so after work every day, they've got 4 hours, and then they have the 7th day where they don't really have to do anything. And so they now begin to discuss, and they know each other. So the question is, if some of the people on the island want to use their extra time, i.e. their capital that they now have, to do something that they think can increase their level of productivity, should they be allowed to do that?
Well, who is there to prevent them from doing it?
The other people on the island.
That would force them not to use their capital?
That's correct. It could. I mean, that's the way a socialistic society or a communistic society, it is the central planner who controls the means of production. So that's how a centrally planned economy operates. So now the question is, should 2 people be able to do something that the other 8 people think is stupid?
Well, this gets pretty quickly to the idea of rights and whether you own your own labor.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And then it also gets into, do you want to have a simple government? Do you want to have a simple set of rules? And if you do, what would be the form of the government? So let's discuss, if we could just briefly, what the different forms of government might be for 10 people. Now, there's going to be one natural one I think you and I will agree to, but on the extreme, and by the way, when I do this with high school classes, there's always one person who believes that there should be a dictatorship, that should be the rule. And back, by the way, back in the days of kings, that's what it was. The king established the rules, and everybody lived by the rules of the king.
Or tribal leader.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it stands to reason you need somebody to resolve disputes. And so maybe those kind of things would evolve. But it seems to me it's a choice when you only have this many people, this few people.
Mm-hmm.
It's a choice to spend your capital to invent government, right? You could have more leisure. You could have more productivity. What you're saying is one of their choices is to now work on government.
Well, no, I'm saying that if two people, let me give you an example.
Okay.
I'm going to morph to the next period, which is the period of innovation. Okay, the period of innovation, and it's capital. It's the period of capital formation. So let me strike the period of capital formation, and this gets into invention, it gets into investment, it gets into risk and reward. Now we're calling an invention by definition. An invention is an innovation. We're calling investment the application of capital in an attempt to increase productivity. It doesn't mean it will succeed. It's like starting a business. You have an idea.
So it's risky. Yeah.
So there's risk. So the next word, risk. There's risk involved, the potential for loss of one's investment. That's the risk. Reward, the gain as a result of a successful investment.
Okay, so just to clarify at this stage, there's no government that's telling you how to manage these things.
That's correct.
How much risk you're allowed to take, how much of it is shared if you lose, how much people have to make up for the difference. You know, you had this socialized losses we've talked about in recent banking problems where everybody has to pay too big to fail.
Sure.
Those kinds of issues. So you don't have any of that yet. Everybody stands on their own and they depend on the goodwill of other people to help them if they fall.
Well, yes, correct. If they get injured, but before that period, everybody's equal. Everybody is exactly equal. Everybody's working the same number of hours, and they're producing the same amount in terms of how everybody else sees that. Everybody sees each other as completely equal from an economic standpoint. But now you have the two people who are gathering food. They have looked at the height of the trees in the forest, and those trees, the tallest trees, are 30 feet. The shortest distance between the big island where they live and where the food grows naturally, which is where they have to climb down the side of the hill, across water that's waist deep, and then up the other side to gather food, the shortest distance is 100 feet. And so they believe that with hundreds of hours of investment, they can build what nobody has ever seen before, which they call a bridge. And they believe that a bridge can be built from the main island to the island with the food, and if they are successful in building that bridge, that they can collect and bring back to the main place where people live. They can bring enough food in 4 hours a day instead of 12 hours a day. So they present this idea to the other 8 people and ask the other 8 people to help them build the bridge.
So helping them, meaning investing some of their capital?
Yes.
Some of their time?
Yes.
Okay.
To help them invest some of their time. But if the other 8 people, and this is the nature of innovation, and this is what changes the trajectory of wealth in a society, almost all innovations are ideas that only a few people grasp the opportunity and believe it can be accomplished. Otherwise, it would have already been accomplished. If everybody agrees instantly, it's a good idea. But like, for example, when the people invented, and this goes back, gosh, Mike, 60 or 70 years, the first copiers, we print copies of stuff all the time now, but the first copies were invented by a company called Xerox.
They were called Xeroxes.
They were called, make me a Xerox. Xerox that.
Right.
So it was a verb. But that company took the idea to 3M, which was a huge company at that time, took the idea to IBM, which was a huge company at that time. Both turned it down and said, we have carbon paper. Why on earth do we need a copying machine that costs so much money when you have carbon paper? And so they had a very hard time raising capital from the people who you would think would know the most, which are the big companies that are involved in the very industry that they were trying to disrupt. And they ended up raising capital, and the rest is history.
Well,
Copiers now are $100.
The same story with computers. The first guy said there's no need for more than 5 of those. All right, we can get into that some other time, but they did not have the vision to see what a computer can do. Some of the original inventors of computers took it around similarly to big companies.
Yeah.
And there's some fabulously funny quotes from those guys about how unuseful this is. And I'm thinking, if you look on a browser today, when you copy somebody on an email, I believe it says CC. Doesn't it? Doesn't say CC on there when you copy somebody?
You know, I don't know that. But
I'm old enough to overlook it, but it means carbon copy.
Carbon copy.
But there's no carbon copy paper involved in
interesting.
an email.
Yeah, and we could go through many examples, and we will over future episodes. But the point that I'm trying to make is that on this island, in this situation, you have 2 people who believe a bridge can be built, and you have 8 people who think it's a dumb idea. And by the way, I had a young fellow come to me many years ago to ask me.
You had a dumb idea?
No, we didn't have a dumb idea. But 103 people thought he had a dumb idea.
Ah.
He brought me an idea, and he said, I need X amount of money to take this small company that I already have and make it a big company. And he said, Mr. Carmichael, I've already called on 103 people. You're the 104th. And I invested in his business, along with a friend of mine, and he grew the business over the next 3.5 years, and we had a very, very nice exit, and he was happy. But the point I'm trying to make is that he went to people who had capital, and 103 of them thought his idea was not worth investing their capital in.
Right.
And so now you have the island where you have 8 people where they say, we want you to help us. And so they say, well, what would you give us if we help you? And he said, well, all right, because this is how capital is raised. And they might say, well, if we are successful in building the bridge, if you help us every hour that you help us, we will give you 2 hours of our help in return because we'll have it available. But it's contingent upon the bridge being successfully built.
Right.
And if nobody thinks the bridge can be built, then no one will help them.
Exactly.
Because they would consider it a waste of their time.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the question though is, should they have the right on the rules of the island? If 8 people think it's a dumb idea and can never be done, should they have the right to use their extra time, their capital, to do something that everybody else thinks is stupid? And in the old days, the answer was the government said no. In fact, in communist or socialistic societies today, they make it very difficult and very expensive for somebody who has a novel idea that the society as a whole thinks is a bad idea, makes it very difficult for them to attempt or raise money for their idea. And so on the island, we're going to say that these 2 people, that the island decides, well, if you want to go waste your time, it's okay. If you want to waste your time trying to build that bridge, it's okay. And so they did. And for the next 2 years, they invested part of their extra 4 hours a day and part of their 12 hours on the 7th day. They invested their time, they cut the trees, they hauled them over, and they actually they figured out how to tilt the logs at such an angle so that they could successfully build a bridge from the main island to the food island, and that you could use it to walk across and get the food. Now the great question, who owns the bridge?
Well, it seems pretty obvious to me, but I suppose there are some people that claim that it's our bridge.
Yes, it's the community. Anybody should be able to use the bridge.
Right.
In which case now they no longer control. They no longer are the people who deliver food, because now people can go get food.
They're out of work.
Huh?
They're out of work.
They're out of work. Exactly. So if their invention, and this, by the way, is so important, if their invention, the value of the invention that they invested their own time in, that everybody else thought was a dumb idea, if they are not able to exploit and take advantage of their invention themselves, then the question is, what does that do to future inventions on the island?
Well, it certainly discourages it.
Yes.
Just one word to use.
Yeah, it would discourage it. Yeah, and it might if the bridge was completely socialized, it would discourage it to the point where nobody would invest their time to do anything else, and that would be the end of the period of invention on the island.
I heard somebody say one time, if we wanted to optimize employment, we should just start carrying packs on our back from Nashville to Chicago and New York to L.A. You get a lot of work, require a lot of work to do that. Just get rid of trucks, right? So, the point is, most innovation is doing away with work. It's making things easier, less risky, less dangerous, and allowing us to live longer and have more leisure time. So we're putting ourselves out of work, speaking very generally, with all of the innovations that we're doing, and we're creating new forms of work then to do even better.
Yeah. A great example of that is hundreds of years ago, somebody invented the machine that knits socks.
Yeah.
Up until that time, the industry that knitted socks did it all by hand. And so the only people who could afford to buy the socks were very wealthy because it took a long time to make a pair of socks. Well, when somebody came out with a machine that would make socks on an automated basis, there was the Luddites. It was what it was called. The Luddites destroyed the factories, believing that it would destroy hundreds or thousands of jobs for making socks for only the wealthy, because only the wealthy could afford them. But what happened was it lowered the cost of producing socks to such a low level that the number of people involved in the sock making industry actually became bigger because socks became affordable for virtually everybody.
Right.
And that's what happens so much. And so on our island here.
Well, you and I can remember when there were elevator operators.
Absolutely.
Right? None of those anymore. People would pump your gas for you. A lot of people are employed just standing there waiting for you to drive up, and they pumped your gas.
Right.
So we invent ourselves out of work.
And by the way, what was the innovation that changed the dynamic of the gas pumping? What was the innovation?
I don't know. I would guess it has to do with law.
No.
And what's safe. But
some laws, some states kept it, forced people to still have some people. New Jersey and Oregon were two states in particular that made it so that you could not pump your own gas.
Right.
But the innovation was allowing people to put the credit card in the pump. And then they didn't have to go into the store to pay for their gas.
Right.
And so they could now pump their own gas and pay for it. And in fact, even the clerk inside wasn't involved in the payment process. But it took that innovation. I'll give you another one. We're just going to digress here just a little bit. Florida was a very not a particularly exciting place to live before one particular invention.
Air conditioning.
And once air conditioning was invented, and then once the ability to produce air conditioning units at a lower and lower cost, once that happened so that you could air condition virtually anything you wanted to economically, all of a sudden places that were hot most of the year became very, very livable, and not only livable, desirable, because a lot of people didn't like the snow and ice of the Northeast, but heating through fire was possible, but air conditioning required an invention.
Right.
And so let's go back here to the island here. And so you have this situation where if the people on the island, the 8 people on the island, vote however they choose, they can overwhelm the 2 people who built the bridge. So the 8 people will ultimately determine what the rules are on the island. So this goes back to the formation of government itself. And I think, Mike, in our tapes on the giants of political thought, I think this is part of all of the tapes. We cover a lot of the philosophy that underpins the question of what is government and what should government do and what should be the power of government versus the power of the individual.
So, tapes is a term that's kind of like carbon copy.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't make tapes anymore.
Yeah.
You and I had a business that produced tapes,
That's
right?
Yep.
But now it's virtual. It streams over the ether.
Well, talk just a little bit about that about that evolution.
On the recording?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we had tapes.
Well,
So if somebody wanted to buy our content.
Well, it was an audio cassette and it came in the mail. And then after that there were CDs. Some people listening may remember CDs, but they're mostly obsolete.
Right.
Because you don't need a physical device anymore. You just download it over streaming of some kind. It comes through the air. And so, again, invention is reducing cost, reducing work, and producing more wealth for less effort.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have these recordings, fortunately, that can be repurposed and enjoyed. The real value in them is the ideas that are explored.
Yeah, and so it's fascinating that just in the world that we're talking about here, the audio cassettes and the covers and the shipping charges and the shipping containers and the fulfillment cost
did away with all of it.
We did away with all of that, and so now you can go to giantsforyou.com or giantspoliticalthought.com. And people can see all of these different recordings about historical ideas. And one of them was in Common Sense by Thomas Paine when the U.S. government had not yet been formed because we were still a British territory. He would argue about what government would naturally become if people were free to set up their own government. Because at that time we lived under the king of Great Britain and the Parliament of Great Britain, but we had no rights as a society to determine how people could invest their capital, or we didn't have any real rights.
So after thousands of years, it had evolved that things were generally led by an authority, a king or a tribal leader or something.
Yeah.
So you find a new nation being created where they say, we don't like this, and the authority really ought to rest in the people who hire the government, right?
Yeah, and the key thing within our own Constitution, there's a section in there to protect innovation. That is what sets up the office of copyright and patents.
And more generally, to protect against the tyranny of the majority.
Yes.
To do what you've already described, where the 8 people are going to take what 2 people have invented.
Right.
So this is the origin of the idea of rights, minority rights, essentially so you can't get voted out of what you deserve.
Yes. And so when we get into the period, on the island of instituting a government. And so you have to decide, and the people do. They have to sit and they have to think about how do we want to be governed? What will be the rules? And if there are 4 or 5 people who decide they want to play a game that they've never played before, what's the first thing, a board game that they've never played before, what's the first thing they do?
Well, I don't know.
They read the rules. They read the rules.
They read the rules. Okay. Yeah.
And then they agree that they're going to play the game according to the rules.
Or not.
Yeah. Well,
I know some people that take liberty with the rules. Okay. They're just suggestions, you know.
All right. Yeah. Well, but the goal of the game is to win the game.
Right.
So if you didn't agree ahead of time to play by the rules of the game, if you didn't agree to do that, as you say, your friends were suggestions.
Right.
If you said, well, no. If 4 people want to change the rules of the game at any time, then there would never be a winner. There would never be a winner, and there would never be a reason to play the game for the purpose of trying to win the game. So you'd be just sitting around kind of playing the game, knowing that as soon as you get ahead, 4 people are going to vote to move you back to go. And so what I'm saying is that this is where you get into this question of the rule of law. And on the island, we haven't had a need to have a government because everybody was completely equal, so there was no need to think of it as, well, what happens if somebody thinks of something that turns out to be really valuable? Who gets the value? And so if everybody on the island had a chance to create whatever they think is more valuable, and they all had a right to do it, then the question is, do they get to keep it? And so when we get into instituting government, we have a few terms that we as these 10 people would be sitting around talking about. One of them is natural rights. Natural rights are the claims to freedom with which every individual is endowed at the moment of birth. Are there any? And so that these 10 people will all be sitting around. While they might not talk about it that specifically, they're going to be talking about, well, if it's two people who say, well, if I invent this bridge, do I get to benefit from it, or is it going to be everybody?
So a big topic of discussion during the founding is what are natural rights, what are civic rights. Not all rights are endowed by nature, I think is the language that the Declaration of Independence says, that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights.
Right.
The language there is to say these belong to us just by the nature of being a human person. It's not created by government. It's not given by government. We own it before any government exists.
Yeah. Yeah. And so on the island, so now what you have is you have a situation where you have two people who have invented a bridge that then allows them to get enough food to service the 10 people, and they're now working 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, and they are now the rich people on the island. They're the wealthy. And so now the question is, should everybody be able to use the bridge? And if we agree that they have exclusive rights to the bridge for a period of time, which, by the way, is how our patent system works. It's how copyrights work.
Right.
When somebody writes a song, they own the rights to that song. And if anybody sings it commercially, they get paid.
For a period of time. Enough time to get rich, and then it's everybody's.
Yeah, or
in future
if nobody likes the song, and a lot of songs get written that are never recorded, then they've wasted their time. They wasted their capital. And so it's an opportunity to become successful.
Right.
And so within our Constitution, it was determined right at the beginning of the founding of our nation, the people who had ideas should be able to own their ideas and commercialize their ideas for a period of time.
Right.
And so that's what we did. And so on the island, we're going to assume we're going to take two scenarios. One is, we said, if everybody starts using the bridge, then if the two people who gather water were thinking about building a pipe of some kind through the swamp to be able to deliver water right where people live.
Why would they do that if it's going to be used by the other people that didn't invest the money?
They wouldn't do it.
They wouldn't do it.
Yeah. And nobody would help them either. Even if they thought, if two other people thought, well, that's a good idea, I'll take you up on your 2-to-1 investment, where you give me 2 hours for every hour I help you.
You still have 6 people that can steal from the 4.
Exactly. And so this is why the rule of law when it comes to commercial property is what caused the change in the trajectory from the 750 years of essentially no real gain, because the people who are in control back in between 1000 and 16 to 1700, the only inventions they cared about were inventions of war. That really was the only ones they cared about. And so the king might reward somebody who invented a weapon somewhat, but they didn't care about anything else. And
we still have these arguments daily. In our current world, one that comes to mind is pharmaceutical companies invent new drugs. It costs them billions of dollars because they invest in a lot of things that don't work, as you mentioned. They spend billions of dollars in ones that don't work. Then the ones that work, the government may say, this is a great for everybody. Everybody should enjoy it. You have to sell it for a price way lower than what will take to get your investment back. Yeah.
Now, the pharmaceutical industry is in the area of the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
And in future episodes, we're going to be talking about that, because the one difference in the island and the pharmaceutical industry, as you just described it, is the pharmaceutical industry today is not selling their drug to the end user.
They're selling it to the government.
They're selling it to Medicare, Medicaid, and the big insurance companies.
Yeah.
And so,
which are highly regulated.
Which are highly regulated, and so the price is not determined by the consumer.
Right.
The price is determined by another entity. And that gets into a level of complexity that we're not going to get into in the island, but we certainly will in future episodes, because we're going to use the island as building the foundation of our principles. And so here are the instituting of government. We talked about natural rights. The word justice, everybody thinks that we ought to have a just society, but how are we going to define it for the island? The equal opportunity of every individual to enjoy his natural rights. The equal opportunity for everybody to enjoy his natural rights. Law, the rules that govern society. Forms of government. You have a state of nature, which is what we had on the island at the early stages. You have democracy. Well, pure democracy on the island would be all 10 people get to vote on everything. You have a republic, which would be where you send your representatives. Right. You have dictatorship.
Right.
And then you have one more, and that is you have some constitution that you agree to first before any of these other forms of government apply. And when we get into how the United States was formed, how the Constitution was written, we'll be talking about what the conditions were at that time. And so that
shaped how they wrote the rules.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. In which the Constitution is the supreme law of the land.
Right.
And it is the supreme set of rules from which all of our other rules are supposed to derive. And so on the island, what we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves, before anybody invented anything, while they're all equal, if they agree that anybody who invents something, that they get a period of time to commercialize their invention and be rewarded by it, then that will stimulate more and more invention. And more invention leads to higher levels of productivity. Higher levels of productivity leads to greater wealth. And so that will be the argument that we're making on the island. But so we
have the great luxury here of defining our own rules for this story that we're making,
yes.
Right? But as we'll see as we talk more about the giants of political thought, part of what they were writing 200, 300, 400 years ago was looking back at a state of nature and imagining what it was like. Some people see a harmony of interests and people collaborate and they work together. Other people see a hellscape. You remember the work that we covered that said
Leviathan.
Leviathan is the state of nature is nasty, brutish, poor, and short.
Yeah.
Lives are nasty,
brutish,
and
that was Thomas Hobbes. I believe that was almost a direct quote. And,
yes.
And so there was a real, and it was a battle of when I say battle, these were a battle of ideas.
Right.
Because ideas is kind of like what John Adams said about the American Revolution. He said the revolution was fought in the 15 years prior to the first shot being fired. It was a battle of ideas.
Yes.
And ideas always precede fundamental change. And so part of what we're going to be going over on our podcast is how ideas drove change. And by the way, a lot of the change was good. A lot of change was bad.
As it always is.
Because that's human nature.
Yeah.
That's what humans do. But so intervention is the degree to which a government interferes with the enjoyment of natural rights. Intervention is the degree to which a government interferes with the enjoyment of natural right. And taxes is the cost of intervention. The cost of intervention. So let's assume on our island that these 10 people agree to property rights, that these 2 people who gather the food own the bridge, and that they are allowed to continue to do so and work 4 hours a day, and everybody else is working 12. And then the 10 people are sitting around one evening, and somebody says, our society is getting quite complex. I think we should have a full-time governor who doesn't rule but who serves the other 9. And I will volunteer to quit my job and be the governor who serves the other 9. So the other 9 are now thinking about what should they be taking into account as they're thinking about that. The obvious one is he serving? Is he wanting to serve or rule? That would obviously be one of the questions. But from an economic standpoint, from a purely economic standpoint, what would the other 9 have to take into consideration?
Well, if they're going to have the same standard of production that they've had, they've each got to increase about 10% what they're doing, because you're taking one person out of the economy.
Yeah, so that means that means they won't be working 12 hours a day. They'll be working longer.
Right.
They will have to work longer to pay for the government. Or they could say, yeah, we'll have a government and we'll let those people who are only working 4 hours a day, we'll let them do the job.
That's called graduated taxation.
Exactly.
Yeah, let the rich pay for it.
Yeah.
They can afford it.
Yeah, and then let's say on our island that now we have a governor who is serving us, and now somebody does get hurt. And they can't produce. Who's gonna pick up their production? Does everybody pick it up equally, or do we tell the 2 people who built the bridge, well, you had the extra time, you do it, or let's say somebody on the island says, look, I'm 65 years old, I'd like to retire. I need to still consume because I haven't saved anything. I need to retire. And so now the other people say, okay, well, let the 2 people for the bridge. So the point is that if
on this island, let me say though, this would probably happen at age 35 instead of 65 because they didn't live to 65.
Fair enough. I'm trying to put it in the context of today in that sense.
Yeah.
But you're right. They might say, I want to retire, but
it's worth saying that the average lifespan 100 years ago was about 50.
Yeah.
Roughly.
Yes.
And retiring at 65 really didn't bother too many people because there wasn't much of a burden there. Now people are living to 70, 80, 90.
Right.
And the economics changed dramatically.
Absolutely.
It's a big problem.
And we'll talk about that in future podcasts. But on the island, the question is, if we continue to tell the people, even though they own the rights to gather the food, the question is, do they own the rest of their time that they have? Is it their time to decide how to spend, or is it the society's time? Because that is the money or the capital on the island that's available to pay for government, to pay for retirement, or to pay if somebody's hurt, if the other people don't want to tax themselves.
So this is really a question of property.
Yes.
And is it owned by an individual or is it owned by groups?
Yes. And that gets into the next question, and that is property rights. And so we get into the property rights, and property is something owned by an individual. That's property. Property rights is an individual's freedom to use his property or her property at his or her own discretion. So property in this sense is not just a thing, it's also your time.
And by the way, I've read people talk about that right as a power to exclude. If I own land, it means I can exclude people from coming on that land and doing what they want with it.
True.
Right. And so in our age of exclusivity and inclusivity, and those are hot buzzwords, and what do they mean and how do we apply them? Property is a problem. If it has the power to exclude, some people don't like the idea that there should be private property with a strong power to exclude.
Well, some people do. But if you, in the absence of private property, what is the alternative?
Well, sure, that's what we're here to talk about.
Yes,
right. It's how we've gotten to where we are.
Yeah. Now, by the way, I want to mention one thing: the fact that the people who built the bridge are using the bridge to go get the food, that does not mean that they own the rights to gather the food. They do not own the rights to do it.
Right.
Anybody who wants to climb down the side of the hill, go across the water, and up the other side,
16 hours a day,
and still do it. They can still go gather their own food.
Right.
Now, if we decide that, just like in a patent, in the way we have it now, is if we decide on the island that nobody else can build a bridge, then they can still get their own food, but they'll do it in a very expensive way.
Well, that applies today. I can grow my own food if I really want to.
Yes.
It just doesn't work very well economically because I can't grow it very well. I'm going to starve if I try to do that.
Well, but there are some people who do for their hobby.
Sure.
They do like to have a garden out back, and they grow tomatoes and things, but they generally don't grow all the food that they're going to need. They grow some of the food. And they may give it to other family members because it's a hobby and something they enjoy doing.
They have the right to do it. I'm just saying it's not economically feasible generally for people to do all of this, build their own house, make their own clothes, grow their own food, get their own water. This is the point of your island. You're taking a few things you've got to do to stay alive and how much work it takes to do it. We have the division of labor because we hire companies to send them in boxes to our home.
Yeah, and then as you get from we're going to be moving in future podcasts from a simple island scenario of 10 people with certain basic principles that we've talked about. We'll be moving to our more complicated society, and also the societies that preceded our society and the evolution of inventions and what the circumstances were and what the rules were that applied, and then what those inventions led to and the implications. So that's, Mike, that's what we're going to be doing in episode 3.
Great. I was educated as an engineer, and one of the basic principles is you break things down into their components, and you understand the components, and you build it up. So that's really what we're about here.
That is. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.